The last thing Evelyn May Thornton remembered was the smell of coffee. Her husband, Thomas, had just poured a cup. The rich, dark scent filled their small ranch house, a simple morning ritual and a life built on simple things. Then came the thunder of hooves. It wasn't a storm, it was something worse. Men, hard men with dead eyes and rifles that glinted in the harsh Arizona sun. They moved like a plague across her land, their laughter sharp and cruel. Evelyn's world dissolved into smoke and screams. She had hidden, jammed herself into the dark, damp space of the root cellar, listening to the sounds of her life being torn apart above her. The splintering wood of their porch, the crash of her grandmother's china, the sickening final grunt from Thomas. And then silence, a silence more terrifying than the noise. When she finally climbed out, the world was gone. Her home was a smoldering skeleton. Her fields were trampled. And Thomas lay in the dust, a crimson flower blooming on his chest, the forgotten coffee cup shattered beside him. She was alone, completely and utterly alone in a land that ate the weak and forgot the dead. Tombstone was a day's ride, but it felt a world away. The men who did this could still be out there, watching, waiting. Grief was a physical thing, a weight that pushed her to her knees. She clutched the silver locket Thomas had given her, its surface now scratched and dull. A single desperate sob tore from her throat. It was in that moment of absolute despair that a whisper of a story returned to her. A tale the settlers told in hushed tones around their fires. A name spoken with a mix of fear and awe. Chaitton, the Shadow Walker. An Apache warrior who moved like a ghost through these lands. They said he was a protector of the innocent, a spirit of vengeance for the wronged. It was a fool's hope, a prayer to a ghost, but she had nothing left. Lifting her face to the vast, empty sky, a sky that had watched her life burn, she whispered his name, a plea so faint it was stolen by the hot desert wind. Chaitton, please, help me. She didn't know if he was real. She didn't know if he could hear her. But in the crushing silence of her ruined life, it was the only sound she could make. Miles away in the jagged peaks of the Dragoon Mountains, Chaitton sat motionless. The setting sun bled across the horizon, painting the rocks in shades of blood and fire. He was a man carved from the land itself, his face a map of sun and hardship, his eyes holding the ancient wisdom of the desert. He was Chiricahua Apache, a warrior of a people who knew this land not as something to be conquered, but as a living, breathing spirit. He had seen what the newcomers did. He had seen their greed, their cruelty, their casual destruction. He preferred the silence of the mountains, the company of ghosts, his own ghosts. But as the wind sighed through the pines, it carried something with it. Not just the faint, acrid scent of smoke from the east. It was something else. A tremor in the spirit of the land, a ripple of profound pain, a cry so raw it resonated in the marrow of his bones. He hadn't heard a sound. He had felt it. He rose in a single fluid motion, silent as the shadow he was named for. His hand found the familiar, worn grip of his rifle. His eyes, sharp as a hawk's, fixed on the distant horizon where that dark smudge of smoke stained the perfect sky. Something was wrong, deeply wrong, and Chaitton, the Shadow Walker, knew his solitude was over. A debt had been cried out on the wind, and he was the one who would have to pay it. Chaitton moved across the desert, not like a man, but like a force of nature. He was the whisper of the wind, the heat shimmering off the rock. He read the story of the land in the bent blades of grass, the overturned pebbles, the tracks left in the sun-baked earth. These tracks were wrong. They weren't the neat prints of travelers or the careful path of a hunter. They were deep, brutal scars, the heavy, uneven gait of shod horses ridden hard, many of them. The marks told a story of violence and haste, a story of men who cared nothing for the land they crossed. He followed the scent of smoke, a foul perfume that grew stronger with every step, and then he saw it, the skeleton of the ranch house, black and jagged against the blue sky, the scattered debris of a shattered life, and the still, silent form lying near what was once a porch. His jaw tightened. He knew this place. He knew the man, Thomas Thornton. Thornton was one of the few, a white man who treated the Apache not as savages, but as neighbors. He traded fairly. He spoke with respect. He understood that this land was big enough for everyone, if they were willing to share it. This wasn't just a raid. This was a violation, an insult to the fragile peace that men like Thornton tried to build. Chaitton's eyes swept the scene, missing nothing. He knelt by Thomas, his expression grim. Then he examined the ground, his focus absolute. The boot prints were clear. Several men, heavy on their heels, moving without care. They had left in a hurry, but not before their work was done. His gaze then caught a different set of tracks, fainter, smaller, leading from the house to the collapsed doors of the root cellar. A woman's tracks, desperate, frightened. He followed the faint trail she'd left when she emerged, the path of a soul staggering under the weight of grief. He found her huddled on the ground a short distance away, a small, broken figure in the vast, indifferent landscape. Her face was buried in her hands, her shoulders shaking with silent sobs. He approached without a sound, his moccasins making no more noise than a passing shadow. He knelt beside her, a silent offering of presence. In the face of such loss, words were useless things. Evelyn flinched as if struck. Her head snapped up, her eyes wide with a fresh wave of terror. She saw a tall, imposing figure, his features shadowed, his dark skin and long hair, marking him as the very thing she'd been taught to fear. Who, who are you? She stammered, her voice a raw, broken thing. Chaitton's voice was soft, carrying the rhythm of the wind and the mountains. I am Chaitton. He paused, his dark eyes holding hers. I heard your whisper on the wind. Evelyn stared, the terror in her eyes slowly giving way to stunned disbelief. Him? The legend? The ghost of the mountains? He didn't look like the savage from the fearful stories. His eyes, they held a sorrow that she recognized, a quiet understanding that crossed the divide between their two worlds. You heard me? She asked, the words barely audible. Chaitton gave a single, slow nod. Tell me what happened here, Evelyn Thornton. And the story poured out of her, a torrent of broken words and choked sobs. The riders, the senseless violence, the murder of her husband, her flight into the darkness of the cellar. She didn't know who they were, only that their cruelty was a bottomless pit. Their faces had been hidden by bandanas, their voices rough and empty of all humanity. Chaitton listened. He didn't interrupt. He didn't move. He simply absorbed her pain, his gaze steady and unwavering. When she finally fell silent, emotionally and physically spent, he remained quiet for a long moment. Then he spoke, and his voice was as hard and unyielding as the desert stone. They will be held accountable. He leaned closer. Tell me everything you remember about them. Anything. A ring on a finger, the sound of a laugh, the way a man walked. No detail is too small. His quiet resolve was a spark in her darkness. She focused, pushing past the grief, reaching for the details. The glint of a silver ring on a man's left hand. The awkward, shuffling limp of another. The harsh, guttural sound of a man's laugh, like rocks grinding together. She gave him every fragment she had. He listened, his mind assembling the pieces of the puzzle. When she was done, he rose to his feet. Stay here, he said. I will track them. Fear flared in her eyes again. Don't leave me. They might come back. I will not be gone long, Chaitton reassured her, his voice softening slightly. But their trail is fresh. I must follow it before the wind erases it. He looked at the wreckage of her home. Gather what you can. Water, food, blankets. Be ready to move when I return. With a final look that was both a promise and a warning, Chaitton turned and walked away. He didn't seem to disappear into the desert. He seemed to become a part of it, a lone, dark figure moving with purpose across the unforgiving land. The hunt had begun, and the Devil's Sons had no idea that a ghost was on their trail. Chaitton followed the tracks west, toward the jagged, saw-toothed peaks of the Black Mesa. It was a desolate, lawless place, a maze of canyons and shadows where men went to disappear. The number of riders, their speed, it all spoke of confidence. They believed they were safe. They were wrong. As he rode his Appaloosa, Ghost Walker, Chaitton's mind worked. This attack felt wrong. It wasn't just robbery. The thoroughness of the destruction, the cold-blooded killing of Thomas Thornton. It was personal. It was calculated. There was a malice here that went beyond simple greed. It was a chilling, empty cruelty that left a stain on the land itself. He found their first camp by a dry riverbed, the embers of a fire carelessly left, discarded tins of food, and a single horseshoe print that was different from the others, its forging crude and uneven. A detail, something to remember. Then half buried in the sand, he found it, a small hand-carved token, a coiled rattlesnake, its fangs bared, with two tiny, glittering chips of obsidian for eyes. Chaitton's blood ran cold. He knew the symbol. It was the calling card of a gang so brutal they were spoken of only in whispers. The Sons of the Devil. Their leader was a man named Jasper Thorne, a name that was a curse across the territory. Thorne was a monster in the shape of a man, known for his love of violence and his almost supernatural ability to slip through the law's fingers. The Sons of the Devil didn't just rob and kill, they terrorized. They left a trail of broken bodies and shattered lives, their motives often as dark and twisted as their souls. Chaitton had seen their work before, the needless bloodshed, the chilling, ritualistic way they destroyed everything they touched. To know they were the ones who had attacked the Thornton Ranch changed everything. This was no longer just about avenging one good man. This was about confronting an evil that was poisoning the frontier. This was about cutting out a cancer. He knew the danger. Thorne's men were loyal, well-armed, and utterly without conscience. But the image of Evelyn's face, streaked with tears and dust, burned in his mind. The memory of Thomas Thornton's quiet dignity fueled his resolve. These predators would not be allowed to hunt again. He swung himself back onto Ghostwalker, urging the horse onward. The trail was clearer now, leading directly into the dark heart of the Black Mesa. The landscape grew harsher, the shadows deeper. The sun began to dip below the horizon, and the air grew cold. He knew the Sons of the Devil would be holed up in one of the Mesa's countless hidden canyons. It was their kingdom, a place where they were the gods, and any stranger was a sacrifice. As darkness fell, Chaitton made a cold camp in a rocky alcove. He ate little, his senses alive, tasting the air, listening to the secrets the night whispered. He was in their territory now. He was the intruder, and he would need every ounce of his skill, his cunning, and his rage to survive what was to come. The wind whistling through the canyons no longer carried a plea for help. It carried a warning. It carried the promise of blood. The Apache was hunting the devils. The Black Mesa was a fortress of stone, a jagged scar on the face of the earth. As the first hint of dawn painted the eastern sky, Chaitton was already moving, a shadow among shadows. He found their camp in a narrow hidden canyon, a place no honest man would ever stumble upon. Horses were tethered, their brands obscured by mud. The embers of a fire glowed faintly inside a crude shelter. Chaitton left Ghostwalker hidden and moved in on foot, his steps silent on the rock. He watched. For a long time, he just watched. Patience was a weapon, and his was razor sharp. 6 men. Their faces were hard, their eyes empty. He saw the big man with the distinctive limp Evelyn had described. He saw the glint of a silver ring on another man's hand. The pieces were fitting together, and then he saw their leader. Jasper Thorne. Even in the dim light, Thorne radiated a cold, venomous authority. He sat apart from the others, cleaning his rifle with a meticulous, unsettling care. His features were sharp, his eyes like chips of black ice. He was perfectly still, but danger coiled around him like a snake. Chaitton was outnumbered 6-1, but he had surprise, and he had a purpose that went beyond gold or fear. He needed to know more. He slipped closer, concealing himself behind a cluster of boulders, his hearing so sharp he could pick out the murmur of their voices. They spoke of the raid. Their voices were flat, bored, recounting the destruction of the Thornton Ranch as if discussing the weather. One man, thin and twitchy, bragged about shooting Thomas. He laughed. Another complained about how little they'd found. "Barely worth the ride," he grumbled. Then Thorne spoke. His voice was low, a gravelly rasp that cut through the others. The old man wasn't the target. A chill, colder than the morning air, traced its way down Chaitton's spine. It was the girl. One of the men sounded confused. The girl? What girl? There was no girl. Thornton had a daughter, Thorne explained, his voice flat. Name's Lily, away at school. Santa Fe. We were supposed to wait for her to get back. The twitchy man, Dobbs, stammered. But why? What's so special about some girl? Thorne's eyes narrowed, and the temperature in the canyon seemed to drop. That's not your concern, Dobbs. Our orders were to bring her to Reno, alive. Reno. The name was unfamiliar, but the implications were staggering. Chaitton's mind raced. Evelyn hadn't mentioned a daughter. Maybe she didn't know. Or maybe Thorne's men had been too impatient. This wasn't a random raid. It was a targeted attack, a kidnapping gone wrong. This went deeper than he could have imagined. He kept listening. They were expecting another rider soon, with new instructions. They were confident, relaxed. They thought their tracks were covered. They had no idea Ghost was listening to their every word. The sun was climbing higher. Time was running out. The arrival of another rider would make things impossible. He had to act now. He moved silently, circling the camp, mapping the position of every man, every weapon. He needed a diversion, something to break their confidence and sow chaos. From the canyon rim, he found what he was looking for, a large, precariously balanced boulder. With a calculated shove, he sent it crashing down the rocky slope. The sound was like a cannon shot, a thunderous roar that ripped through the morning quiet. What in tarnation was that? One of the outlaws yelled, scrambling for his rifle. In that single moment of confusion, Chaitton made his move. He didn't just appear. He erupted from the shadows, his rifle already at his shoulder, its barrel pointed directly at the heart of Jasper Thorne. Sons of the devil, he announced, his voice echoing off the canyon walls, cold and final as a eulogy. Your reign of terror ends here. The outlaws spun, weapons coming up, faces a mixture of shock and fury. Thorne, however, didn't look surprised. He just looked annoyed, as if a bothersome insect had interrupted his morning. Well, well, Thorne drawled, a lazy, mocking smile on his lips. Look what the desert coughed up. An Apache brave. You lost, friend? I am here for justice, Chaitton replied, his voice flat and hard. For Thomas Thornton, and for the fear you spread like a disease. Then all hell broke loose. Gunfire exploded in the confined space, the sound deafening. Chaitton was already moving, diving behind a boulder as bullets chipped away at the stone, sending splinters flying past his face. He returned fire, not wildly, but with a cold, deliberate precision. Each shot had a purpose. The twitchy man, Dobbs, screamed and went down, clutching a shattered leg. The hulking outlaw with the limp took a step back, a look of pure astonishment on his face, before he crashed to the ground. It was a whirlwind of violence. Chaitton used the terrain like a weapon, a phantom darting between cover, his rifle speaking in short, deadly sentences. The outlaws, used to terrorizing unarmed settlers, were caught completely off guard by a foe who was faster, smarter, and deadlier than any they had ever faced. Thorne, however, was different. He remained calm in the chaos, directing his men, his own shots measured and aimed. He was a killer, and he recognized another. This was not a robbery. This was a battle between predators. Chaitton saw one of the men trying to scramble up the canyon wall, looking for a high angle to flank him. Without taking his eyes off the main fight, Chaitton drew his heavy knife and threw it. The motion was a blur. The blade spun through the air, catching the sun, and buried itself in the man's chest. He gasped, a silent, final scream, and tumbled back down the rocks. Panic began to set in among the remaining men. One of them made a desperate run for the horses. A single, perfect shot from Chaitton dropped him in his tracks. Now it was just Thorne and one other man. Thorne's eyes locked with Chaitton's across the space of the camp. For the first time, Chaitton saw something other than arrogance in them. It was a flicker of cold, hard respect. You're a hell of a fighter, Apache, Thorne said, his voice strangely calm. But this ends now. Thorne charged, firing as he came. Chaitton met him head on. It wasn't a gunfight anymore. It was primal. Their rifles became clubs, clashing in a shower of sparks. They were a tangle of muscle and hate. Thorne was strong, a brute driven by pure malice. But Chaitton was faster, his movements fluid, born of a lifetime of survival. He twisted Thorne's rifle from his grip, sending it skittering across the rocks. They grappled, their breath coming in ragged gasps. Thorne pulled a hidden knife, its blade a wicked sliver of steel. The blade slashed out and Chaitton moved just in time, the knife slicing through his sleeve, drawing a thin line of blood on his arm. With a powerful shove, Chaitton broke free. Before Thorne could recover his balance, Chaitton drew his own knife. He moved with the speed of a striking serpent. The fight was over. Jasper Thorne lay still in the dust, the cold authority in his eyes finally extinguished. The last outlaw, seeing his leader fall, threw down his gun, his hands shooting into the air. Silence descended on the canyon, broken only by the whimpering of the wounded man and the ragged breathing of the survivor. Justice had been done, but the name still echoed in Chaitton's mind. Reno, and the girl, Lily. He tied up the survivor, his questions sharp and brutal. He learned nothing more. The man was just a hired gun, paid to follow Thorne's orders, not to understand them. Chaitton instructed him to bury his dead, a grim task for a man who had just seen his world end. Then he mounted Ghostwalker and rode out of the canyon, not looking back. The hunt for the sons of the devil was over, but a new, more dangerous hunt had just begun. He had to get back to Evelyn. He had to tell her that her husband's murder was just the beginning of a nightmare she hadn't even known she was in. Evelyn saw him coming from a long way off, a lone rider emerging from the shimmering heat haze. She ran to meet him, her heart a frantic drum against her ribs. His face was a stone mask, impossible to read. "They're gone," Chaitton said, his voice flat, carrying no hint of victory. "They won't trouble this land again." A wave of relief so powerful it almost buckled her knees washed over Evelyn, but it was followed by the cold, heavy reality of her loss. "Thank you," she whispered. "You did what no one else could." "There is more," Chaitton said, his dark eyes serious. He swung down from his horse. "Their leader, Jasper Thorne, he spoke of a daughter, Lily. He said they weren't here for you or for Thomas. They were waiting for her. She is at school in Santa Fe." Evelyn's breath caught in her throat. The world tilted on its axis. Lily? How could they know about Lily? The relief of moments ago was consumed by a new, colder fear. Tears welled in her eyes, but these were not tears of grief. They were tears of pure terror. "Oh God, Lily!" "They were given orders," Chaitton continued, his voice grim, "to bring her to a man named Reno, alive." Evelyn's mind spun. Lily wasn't her daughter. She was Thomas's daughter from his first marriage, a kind, gentle young woman of 20. Evelyn had married Thomas later in life, and she loved Lily like her own. But why would anyone want her? It made no sense. "We have to get to her," Evelyn said, her voice shaking, but hardening with a sudden, fierce resolve. "We have to warn her before they do." "Santa Fe is a long ride," Chaitton said, his brow furrowed, "and we don't know who this Reno is. We don't know how many men he has." "I don't care," Evelyn insisted, her fear transforming into a white-hot protective instinct. "She's all I have left. I have to go." Chaitton looked at her, at this woman who had lost everything, who was now ready to ride into an unknown danger for a girl who wasn't even her own blood. He saw a strength in her that mirrored the harsh resilience of the desert itself. "I will go with you," he said, his decision absolute. "We will leave at first light." Gratitude, profound and overwhelming, filled Evelyn's heart. This stranger, this legend she had called out to in desperation, had not only delivered justice, but was now willing to risk everything to help her again. As they gathered the few salvageable supplies from the ruins of the ranch, a silent understanding passed between them. They were from different worlds, a grieving widow and an Apache warrior. But tragedy had erased the boundaries between them. They were united now by a shared purpose. She no longer saw a savage warrior. She saw a man of honor, a man who understood loss. And he saw a woman of unbreakable spirit, a survivor who refused to be broken. The journey north would be dangerous. They would be riding into the heart of a conspiracy they didn't understand, against an enemy they had never seen. but they would ride together. The desert wind whispered a new story now, not of grief, but of resolve. A story of an unlikely alliance forged in fire and blood. Their path was dark and uncertain, but they would ride into it without hesitation. They would ride for Lily. The journey north was a trial by fire. The familiar desert of southern Arizona gave way to the high, desolate plains of New Mexico. The sun was a relentless hammer, the nights a chilling void. For Evelyn, every mile was a fresh torment, carrying her further from the ashes of her life. Yet the image of Thomas was burned behind her eyes, a constant, aching presence. Despair was a constant companion. In the vast, crushing emptiness of the landscape, she felt the emptiness in her own soul. But then she would look at Chaitton. He rode with a quiet stillness, as much a part of the land as the rocks in the sky. He was her anchor. He taught her the secrets of this unforgiving world. How to find water where there was none. How to read the signs of the weather in the clouds. How to build a smokeless fire. He moved with a grace and purpose that made the harsh land seem like a garden only he knew how to tend. One night, huddled by a small fire, the silence between them felt different. It was heavy with things unsaid. Did you have a family, Chaitton? Evelyn asked, her voice barely a whisper. He stared into the flames, and for a moment, the stone mask of his face softened. The firelight revealed a deep, ancient sadness in his eyes. I did, he said, his voice a low rasp. A wife, Narelyn. A son, Tassa. The sickness that came with the blue coats. It took them. It took many. He fell silent. The weight of his words hung in the night air. Evelyn's heart ached for him. She had seen the warrior. Now she saw the man, a man who carried a grief that dwarfed her own. I'm so sorry, she whispered, the words feeling small and useless. He gave a slow, almost imperceptible nod. Grief is a shadow that walks with us, he said, his gaze meeting hers across the small fire. We learn to carry it, the memory of those we loved. That is our strength. Your memory of Thomas, your love for Lily, that is your strength now. In that moment, their bond was sealed. They were no longer just allies. They were survivors. Two people from two different worlds, finding a shared humanity under a sky full of cold, distant stars. 3 days later, he found the tracks. Chaitton slid from his horse, his body instantly tense. He knelt, examining the ground. Evelyn's stomach tightened into a cold knot of dread. What is it? Riders, he said, his voice grim. 3 of them. They passed this way less than a day ago. He pointed to a faint mark in the dirt, a crudely forged horseshoe print. The same as at Black Mesa. They are careless. They are in a hurry. The realization hit Evelyn like a physical blow. This wasn't just a journey to warn Lily. It was a race. A desperate, frantic race. And they were losing. They pushed their horses to the breaking point, the specter of Reno's men a constant, unseen pressure. The fear was a bitter taste in Evelyn's mouth. What if they were already too late? They reached Santa Fe under the cover of a moonless night. The city was a maze of dark adobe buildings and narrow, twisting streets. The sounds of a saloon piano and drunken laughter felt like they were from another planet, a world that knew nothing of their desperate flight. Evelyn guided them, relying on a hazy memory of a visit with Thomas years ago. They kept to the shadows, avoiding the main streets. The school, La Academia de Santa Maria, was a large, walled compound on the quiet edge of the city. This is it, Evelyn whispered, her voice trembling. Chaitton studied the high wall. There will be a watchman. They left the horses and crept forward on foot. As he predicted, a lone guard patrolled the perimeter, his lantern casting long, dancing shadows. They watched from the darkness, timing his circuit. The moment the guard was on the far side of the compound, Chaitton moved. He scaled the wall with the silent agility of a panther, dropping into the courtyard without a sound. A moment later, the heavy gate creaked open just enough for Evelyn to slip inside. The courtyard was silent, the school building looming over them, every window dark. Every door was bolted. Their hopes of a simple entry vanished. The kitchen, Evelyn whispered, pointing to a smaller building attached to the main one. The latch on the pantry window was always loose. They moved like ghosts along the wall. Chaitton worked at the latch with the tip of his knife. It was rusted, stubborn. Suddenly, the sound of the watchman's returning footsteps echoed from the corner. Chaitton froze, pulling Evelyn flat against the cold adobe wall, melting them into the deepest part of the shadows. The lantern light swept past, inches from where they hid. Evelyn held her breath, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. The moment he was gone, Chaitton went back to work. With a final twist, the latch gave way with a soft click. He raised the window and Evelyn scrambled through, followed by Chaitton, who pulled it silently shut behind them. They were in. They navigated the dark kitchen and entered the main hall. The floorboards groaned under their weight, each sound magnified in the suffocating silence. "Dormitories are upstairs," Evelyn breathed. "Room 7. They climbed the wide staircase, every step a heart-stopping risk. As they reached the top landing, a door down the hall opened, spilling a rectangle of yellow light. A stern-faced matron in a nightdress emerged, holding a candle. They flattened themselves into an alcove, their bodies rigid. The matron shuffled past, grumbling to herself, and disappeared into a washroom. They didn't wait for a second chance. They hurried to room 7. The doorknob was cool under Evelyn's trembling hand. She turned it slowly. It wasn't locked. She pushed the door open. The room was lit by a single candle. In one of the narrow beds, a young woman with long, dark hair was sleeping peacefully. Lily. A wave of relief so intense it made Evelyn dizzy washed over her. She was safe. They had made it. Evelyn rushed to the bedside. "Lily," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "Lily, wake up." Lily's eyes fluttered open, confused. "Evelyn, what are you doing here? Is everything all right?" Before Evelyn could answer, a voice, smooth and cold as a serpent's skin, slid out from the darkest corner of the room. "Touching, really, a family reunion." They both spun around. Two men stepped from the shadows, their pistols leveled and steady. Behind them, a third figure emerged into the candlelight. He was tall, impeccably dressed in a suit that belonged in a different world. His face was handsome, but his eyes were cold and dead. It was Reno. He held a small pearl-handled derringer, and it was aimed directly at Lily's heart. "Jasper Thorne sends his regards," Reno said, a cruel smile twisting his perfect lips. He looked past Evelyn, his cold gaze falling on Chaitton, who had moved to stand between the women and the gunman. "And you must be the Indian who has been such a nuisance." Thorne was right. "You are a problem I am now here to solve." The silence in the room was thick enough to choke on, broken only by the soft hiss of the candle. Reno's gun was perfectly steady. His two henchmen were professionals, their eyes cold and alert. They were predators who had waited patiently for the trap to spring. Evelyn's first instinct was to throw herself in front of Lily, a primal urge that burned away her fear. But Chaitton didn't move. He stood as still as a stone, but he was coiled, every muscle ready. His eyes weren't on the guns. They were darting around the room, taking in every detail. The window, the heavy curtains, the small desk with its glass inkwell, the dancing, distorted shadows on the wall. "So you're the one who cost me Jasper Thorne," Reno said, his voice a silken purr of menace. His gaze flickered possessively toward Lily. "A considerable expense. But no matter. You've simply delivered the prize to my doorstep." "Lily has done nothing to you," Evelyn said, her voice shaking but firm. "What do you want with her?" Reno chuckled, a soft, condescending sound. "Oh, my dear Mrs. Thornton, this isn't about what she's done. It's about what she is. It's about legacy." He took a step closer, the scent of his cologne filling the small room. "Her name wasn't always Thornton, you see. Her mother's father, a miserable old prospector named Elias Vance, found a piece of land in the Dragoon Mountains 30 years ago. Land my father had already claimed, only to have it stolen by a corrupt official. Elias found a vein of silver so rich, they called the claim the Serpent's Tooth." His eyes gleamed with a feverish light. But he was a coward. He was afraid of the wealth, so he hid the deed, registered the land under a false name, and died a pauper. All he left his daughter was a cheap locket and a map, hidden inside a child's storybook. He gestured with the derringer toward Lily. A book which I believe now belongs to you, my dear. The deed to the serpent's tooth. My birthright. The pieces slammed into place with horrifying clarity. This was never about a random raid. It was a cold, calculated plan born of pure greed. Thorne and his men were just tools, wielded by this monster in a tailored suit. You murdered Thomas? For a piece of paper? Evelyn breathed, horrified. Collateral damage, Reno said with a shrug. Thorne was an impatient fool. His mistake. And now it will be yours. He turned his cold eyes back to Chaitton. You, Apache, you have a choice. Lay down your weapons. Walk away. I have no quarrel with your kind. My business is with them. Chaitton's answer was silence. His gaze was locked on Reno, but Evelyn saw his hand, hanging loose at his side, twitch once. He was waiting. Then a sound from the hallway, a sharp knock on a door down the hall, and the muffled voice of the matron. Girls, lights out! I heard voices! Settle down at once! It was the smallest distraction, a split second, but it was enough. One of the henchmen glanced toward the door. In that instant, Chaitton exploded. He didn't charge. He didn't reach for his gun. His foot shot out, kicking the small nightstand with impossible speed and accuracy. The stand flew, sending the burning candle tumbling through the air. It hit the heavy velvet curtains. For a heart-stopping moment, the flames seemed to die. Then with a sudden, violent whoosh, the dry fabric erupted in a tower of fire. In the same fluid motion, Chaitton grabbed the glass inkwell from the desk and hurled it against the wall next to the gunman. It shattered, splattering dark ink everywhere, a disorienting burst of black in the flickering, chaotic light. A gunshot roared, the muzzle flash a blinding star. The henchman had fired wildly at where Chaitton had been a second before. Evelyn shoved Lily to the floor behind a bed as the bullet ripped through the wall. She heard a choked gasp and the heavy thud of a body hitting the floor. Another muzzle flash lit the scene. The second gunman was stumbling back, his hands clutching his throat, where the dark handle of Chaitton's knife was now buried to the hilt. Chaitton was a phantom in the swirling smoke and firelight, a whirlwind of brutal, silent grace. Reno, blinded and confused, screamed in rage and fired his derringer. The small bullet whizzed past Chaitton's head. Before Reno could fire again, Chaitton was on him, slamming him against the wall. The derringer clattered to the floor. Chaitton's hand locked around Reno's throat, his powerful forearm cutting off the man's air. The first gunman, recovering, raised his pistol. Chaitton, still pinning Reno, kicked out with his leg, his foot connecting with the man's wrist. There was a sickening crunch of bone. The pistol flew from the man's hand and he howled in agony. The entire fight had lasted less than 10 seconds. The room was now an inferno, smoke filling the air, flames licking at the ceiling beams. Screams echoed from the hallway. Chaitton held Reno against the wall, his face a mask of cold fury in the firelight. Reno's arrogance was gone, replaced by pure animal terror. Please, he choked, his voice a pathetic rasp. Take the mine. It's yours. Just let me live. You speak of legacy, Chaitton hissed, his voice a low, dangerous growl. The only legacy you leave is this fire and the blood you have spilled. Your life is worth less than dust. Evelyn was sure he was going to kill him. She saw all the pain, all the loss, all the righteous anger coiling in his grip. But then his eyes met hers over Reno's shoulder. He saw her shielding Lily, and something in his expression shifted. With a final, contemptuous shove, he slammed Reno's head against the wall. The man's eyes rolled back, and his body slid to the floor unconscious. We have to go. Now, Chaitton commanded. He pulled his knife from the dead man's throat, wiping it clean. Evelyn grabbed Lily's hand. The book, Lily. The storybook from your grandfather. Lily, her mind sharp with adrenaline, scrambled to a small chest and pulled out a worn leather-bound book of fairy tales. She clutched it to her chest as they turned not to the chaotic hallway, but to the window. Chaitton tore down the rest of the burning curtains, stomped out the flames, and smashed the window pane with the butt of his pistol. Out, he ordered. The drop was 12 feet. Evelyn didn't hesitate. She swung over the sill and dropped, landing in the soft grass of the garden below. Lily followed, her fall broken by Evelyn. Chaitton was last, landing beside them with a soft thud. They fled across the courtyard, the sounds of the fire and the screams fading behind them. Chaitton unbarred the gate, and they slipped back into the darkness of the Santa Fe streets. They reached their horses and rode, not looking back, leaving the city and the chaos behind them, plunging into the vast, dark wilderness that was now their only sanctuary. Hours later, as the first pale light of dawn touched the horizon, they finally slowed. They were deep in the foothills, fugitives with a secret map to a fortune that had already cost one man his life and nearly cost them their own. Reno was alive. Men like him did not forgive. They did not forget. The whispered plea for help had become a desperate flight for survival. Lily looked from Evelyn's weary face to Chaitton's grim profile. "What do we do now?" she asked, her voice small in the vast quiet. Chaitton stared ahead at the rugged peaks of the Sangre de Cristo Mountains, painted purple and rose by the rising sun. "We do not run," he said, his voice ringing with a new, unshakable purpose. "We go home. We go to the Dragoon Mountains. The serpent's tooth is yours, and we will not let them take anything else from you." The journey back was different. It was no longer a flight, but a pilgrimage. They rode with purpose, the worn storybook now a symbol of defiance. In its pages lay not just a map to a silver mine, but the deed to their future, a future they would have to fight for. The struggle in the Santa Fe boarding school was swift and decisive, a brutal testament to Chaitton's lethal skill. He had neutralized Reno's hired guns with a speed that was both terrifying and beautiful. Reno himself, the man who had orchestrated so much pain from the safety of the shadows, was left broken and humiliated, outmatched by the fierce heart of those he sought to crush. Justice, though hard-won and bloody, had prevailed. For now, Lily was safe, and the immediate threat was extinguished. But Evelyn and Lily, now forever bound by the fire and tragedy they had endured, knew this was not the end. As they rode south under the silent protection of the Apache warrior who had answered a desperate whisper on the wind, they were not just returning to the ashes of a life. They were riding to build a new one, on land that was rightfully theirs, carrying with them the memory of the man who had shown them the true meaning of courage. The bond forged in the dust and despair of the Arizona Territory had become an unbreakable testament to the power of compassion in a world of unimaginable hardship. They would reclaim their legacy, not of silver, but of survival. Thank you for watching this tale of the Wild West. If you enjoyed this story of courage, loss, and unexpected alliances, please hit the like button. Share this video with anyone who loves a good Western drama filled with twists and real human grit. And don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more captivating stories from the heart of the frontier. Your support helps us bring these tales to life. What did you think of Chaitton's actions? Let us know in the comments below. We always love hearing from you. Until next time, keep the spirit of the West alive.